Ambassador Aaron Vale had stood beneath chandeliers of living crystal on 12 human capitals and under the silent gravity bells of a dozen alien courts, but nothing pressed on his chest like Aegis Nexus, the orbital city ringed in pale auroras above Viral's halo, the Concord of Ashes, the first peace summit since the end of the Cinder skirmishes, hummed with the caution of people who had been exchanging railgun flares 6 months earlier and now exchanged toasts. The central reception hall, half arboretum, half cathedral, throbbed with music tuned to equal temperament across 13 species. 1,000 diplomatic niceties drifted like pollen, ceremonial nods, practiced smiles, careful distances. Arin's eyes kept sliding to a figure who bent the room's geometry around her just by standing still. Queen Soraya Thal of the Volpar Dominion, beautiful in a way that felt engineered by myth, stood atop a dais of darkwood, ears like sculpted ember petals twitching with micro-expressions. Orange fur, lustrous, deep at the roots and sunlit at the tips, framed a face unmistakably human-shaped. High cheeks, fox-bright eyes of amber gold, a mouth that could cut marble with a single, precise smile. Her tail moved with an elegant, slow certainty, as if sketching signatures in the air. Arin had devoured archives on Volpar protocol, on the meanings of tail angles, ear pivots, claw sheaths, but the files had not said how loneliness looked in a queen's posture. It was there, a ring of careful air around Soraya that attendants could not cross, dignitaries would not disturb, and allies did not understand. He glanced down at his slate of talking points for the next day's negotiation docket, customs reciprocity, debris corridor charts, joint rescue codes, then let the slate dim. He didn't need bullet points to tell him the stakes. Peace could snap like sponge sugar. One mispronounced honorific could harden every bright possibility into shrapnel. A ripple of motion tugged his attention, a small Volpar figure unmoored from a cluster of stewards near the refreshment grove. The child was perhaps 6 in human years. He wore midnight silk embroidered with constellations, ears wider than his face when they tipped with uncertainty. His fur, tangerine bright, made his violet eyes seem almost luminous. He pivoted among gowns and uniforms and flowing robes with the trapped animal panic of someone who had forgotten which way was forward. Arin's chest did its traitorous ache. Protocol suggested a steward. Humanity suggested him. Arin softened his shoulders and slowed his approach in the specific Volpar way, no direct line, no looming height, coming to a diagonal half-step and dipping his head. "Excuse me," he said, in careful Concord Standard before switching to High Volpantine, vowels warmed by weeks of practice. "Are you separated from your guardians, little star?" The child's ears perked. Relief bloomed so nakedly that Aaron wished diplomacy were always this honest. I drifted?" the boy said, the Arin drifted rolling like a purr. "I am Prince Terran, third of that name. The attendants went to argue about the nap time that is not mine." Arin's smile was small and real. "I'm Aaron Vale. Human. Very good at finding lost naps that belong to no one." Terran's whisker lines quivered. Volpar laughter. "Mother says humans are knife-mouthed in debate. You do not look very sharp." "We sometimes use spoons," Aaron said gravely. The prince's tail made an involuntary happy flick. The room's motion became loud again, glitter and scent and the mild ozone tang that lived in Aegis Nexus's recycled air. Arin eased them toward a quieter alcove beneath a glass-leaf canopy grown from living ship hulls, where light made fish scales on the floor. "Tell me, Terran," he said, "what do you like to do when you are not escaping nap times that never were?" "I read star maps," Terran answered at once, "and histories, and poems carved into tooth ivory. Did you know—" He paused, searching Aaron's face, then continued with a careful dignity. "Did you know some humans make families with choice? Not only blood?" Aaron met that earnest violet gaze. "We do. Adoption, marriage. A family can be a decision someone repeats every day." Terran tasted the word. "A decision that repeats." His ears tipped forward with thoughtfulness. "Volpar law says bloodlines bind. The old songs say bonds bind. The songs feel truer than the law." "Sometimes songs get there first," Aaron said. Terran glanced around, courage shriveling again at the crowd. He made a tiny noise in his throat that no one who had never comforted a frightened child would hear. Aaron knelt to reduce even the idea of height. "May I wait with you?" he asked. "I am highly trained in looking unimportant in important rooms." Terran's paws, hands really, with velveted claws, twined in his silk. Yes, he whispered. Please. They spoke of small things, of shipboard sweets, of a human game called hopscotch that made Terran's eyebrows, dark accents in his orange halo, rise with fascinated disdain, of Volper harvesting rites where elders braided Comet Gleam into fur and told stories to the beat of the slow drum. Arin did not ask about war. He did not ask about loss. He answered questions about languages 4, badly, about human dens apartments, sometimes stacked like hive cells, about why humans wore ties no one knew. He was aware, after a while, of a change in the room's weather. Curiosity leaned toward them. Polite frowns tried not to form. Volpar officials began to home on the prince's scent signature like a net drawing tight. And behind them all, unmoving and therefore the pivot point of the entire space, Soraya Thal watched. When she approached, people reacted the way fields react to a coming storm, straightening, sharpening. Up close, the humanoid in her beauty was more disarming than the alien. Those eyes, fox bright and human readable, that mouth, unsheathed of fangs, and yet somehow more dangerous for it, the line where throat met collarbone, kissed by a necklace of black opals that drank the light. Prince Terran, she said, voice low and warm and not at all the flensing blade rumors promised. Your attendants say the Heir devoured you. Terran's ears tucked. The Heir is very greedy, mother. She turned her gaze, sun through amber, to Arin. Ambassador Vale, your scent is calm. Volpar compliments were physiological. Arin found himself absurdly pleased. I am honored to have waited with His Highness, he said in high Vulpentine, keeping it simple and slow. We discussed hopscotch and the legislative power of repeating decisions. One of Soraya's ears dipped, the Volpar version of an intrigued brow. You teach our prince's civil philosophy through pavement chalk. Only the good parts. Terran wriggled in place. Mother, he says humans choose family every day. May I read a law about that? Many, perhaps, Soraya said. Something wavered and steadied in her eyes. Ambassador Vale, my son does not sit still for those who do not see him. You have seen him. That is rare. It felt? Self-evident, Arin said lightly, because anything heavier might break in his hands. Soraya's tale drew a thoughtful arc. Self-evident things are the hardest for rulers to remember. She glanced to the side, where the chief attendant hovered with the fury of a scolded comet. Come, Terran! You must greet the spindle envoy without, stepping on his spindle. Terran clung for a heartbeat to Arin's sleeve, a reflex more than a rebellion, then released with a little Volpar bow so perfect it made the old chamberlain sniff into his cuffs. Soraya inclined her head to Arin, a queen's thanks disguised as protocol, and the royal gravity well moved on. Arin exhaled. The room began to breathe again. The next days braided themselves. Dawn councils, midday subcommittees, evenings perfumed with the risky sweetness of cordialities. Between them, like a comet that knew all the gravitational shortcuts, Terran found Arin. Sometimes it was in the observation arcade, where glass ribs held back the cosmos and Viral's halo spilled its pastel fires. Sometimes in the archive woods, where living paper trees whispered transcripts when you pressed your palm to their bark. Sometimes in the Zero Hall, where children of 19 worlds floated like seed fluff and argued about whether gravity was unjust. Arin never initiated. He always made sure there was a steward just within sightline, a Volpar warder close enough to run. But every time Terran appeared, the boy's relief was so unguarded that Arin felt both honored and gutted. They discussed human bedtime stories. They discussed Volpar hunting songs, which were not about death, but about praise. They discussed the difference between an argument that wins and an argument that convinces your grandchildren to forgive you. On the fourth sunset, with the auroras thin as silk, Terran asked, "Do you have kits, Ambassador?" Arin's answer came with surprising honesty. "No. I poured too much of me into bargains and flights and rooms like this. That seems like when you cook a stew too long and all the good parts go to steam," Terran said. "You would be a good stew, father." His ears flattened with mortification. Arin's laugh shook once, then softened. "You rescue me from myself with metaphors, Your Highness. Mother says metaphors are how honesty wears a coat." Arin looked at his reflection in the glass, thin, tired hair like stubborn iron filings, and saw a man he did not dislike as much as he expected. "Your mother is wise." "She is busy," Terran said, quiet threading the words. Busy is a shape she wears that does not fit. Aaron, who had never seen Soraya sleep, found that metaphor stayed with him for hours. It was Terran who asked. It was Soraya who said yes. Tonight, Terran announced, formal with excitement, Ambassador Vale will tell a human story. Soraya inclined her head, mouth faintly amused. I have not been told a story in some time. They met in the royal suite's common hall, a space that made comfort look regal. Low couches, carved screens, warm light, a window framing the planet like a keepsake. Servants flickered at the edges like kind ghosts. The chief attendant arranged himself to hear every word and disapprove none of them. Aaron did what he had learned to do with children. He sat on the floor. He told a story about a river town that nearly starved to death because maps lied and the river changed its mind. About a baker who measured flour by the river's whisper, and a fisher who learned the fish's grammar, and a child who climbed the bell tower every night to name the stars to the town until the town remembered its own name. He did not name the town. He did not name the child. He did not need to. Terran's ears did a dance that was half tail language, half human gasp. Soraya sat still, the stillness of a huntress who has laid down the spear because the moon is too beautiful to throw at. When the story ended, Terran breathed. She put the sky inside them. That's what the best stories do, Aaron said. They put the sky somewhere safe. Soraya's voice was half smoke, half praise. Tell another, not now, tomorrow, duties divide us. Stories graft us back together. Aaron bowed his head. It would be my honor. The chief attendant did not disapprove. He looked, for once, like a man relieved that the world might not end on his watch. After Terran was carried away in the arms of sleep and silk, Soraya remained. The common hall felt larger, though they had not moved. Outside, Viral's halo flamed and faded, a tide in the sky. Ambassador Vale, she said, not looking at him, I have watched you with my son. No one else has startled him into laughing at his own seriousness. No one else has listened to him with the patience of someone who is not harvesting utility. Arn blinked at the bluntness. I'm sorry, that is rare. It is rarer in palaces than in fields, Soraya said. Terran's father. A pause, a slow inhale that smoothed the fur at her throat. He died with honor. Honor does not do bedtime. I have been dressed in this throne since my bones were soft. I forget that power is a poor co-parent. Aaron could have lied. He could have offered platitudes like flowers that wilt after the applause. Instead, he said gently, grief makes power clumsy. It makes all of us clumsy. Soraya's mouth did not smile. Something in her eyes did. You do not flatter. Good. I do not require flattery. I require people who will argue with me and not break when I am sharper than I mean to be. I have a spoon, Aaron offered solemnly. A surprised sound, almost a laugh, quickly domesticated, escaped her. We will need more spoons before this is done, Ambassador. Aaron, he said, surprising himself. Here, now, I am Aaron. Soraya, she said, trying his name in her mouth like a spice. Here, now. News crawled forward with the caution of a cat. Clauses clicked into place. Patrol maps redrew themselves with dotted lines of hope. Joint rescue protocols were signed over sea salt tea and careful handshakes, over the Queen's low promises and the ambassador's stubborn insistence on plain language. Between sessions, a child and a human practiced hopscotch under a glass-leaf canopy while warders pretended not to watch. Aaron and Terran made a ritual of why. Why do grown-ups pretend simple questions are traps? Why do treaties avoid the words that matter? Why do people call enemies the others, when the others have bedtime and soup and songs? Because fear prefers big words, Aaron said, chalking a square. Big words give fear a ladder to climb. Then we kick the ladder, Terran said, and did. One afternoon, as Aegis Nexus rotated the sun into a hoarded blaze, Terran asked, very softly, are there human words for a father who is not blood? There are many, Aaron said, throat suddenly tender. Some of them are just names spoken the right way. Terran looked away quickly, ears folding like hands. Good, he said in a voice that pretended it was not saying something important. There should be words for what things are. Aaron chalked a small star in a corner of the hopscotch grid and did not ask anything else. He could feel a boundary, thin as a soap film, shining with rainbows. He would not prod. The final ceremony swelled like music swelling toward its inevitable bright chord. Delegations poured into the Grand Assembly, a bowl of obsidian and light. The air tasted like mint and metal. Translations layered like bird calls. Soraya stood center stage in a gown the color of hearth coals seen through tears. Her ears were jewel still, her voice. When it came, cut even the echo into attention. "We have agreed," she said, "to make agreements worth more than paper. We have promised to rescue each other when the stars burn wrong. We have promised to teach our young that maps redraw faster when drawn together." Applause rippled, the safe kind. Aaron clapped, eyes flicking, because habit is stronger than hope, to the royal tier where Taryn sat straight and properly unsmiling. The boy's hands, too white on the armrests, told another story. His ears did not twitch with curiosity. They pinned with overwhelm. Aaron recognized the pattern. He had seen it on a nephew in a crowded orbital bazaar. The shapes were different. The animal beneath was the same. He moved, not dramatically, not heroically. He slipped sideways, then diagonally, then along an aisle. A human ambassador learned long ago that there are ways to cross a room without the room noticing until it is too late to object. Taryn noticed. Relief reshaped his face so completely that Aaron forgot how to breathe for one instant. "We will be tested," Soraya was saying, and her words carried the layered poise of someone who had not looked yet to see what had changed and would not falter when she did. "We will be tested by memory, by rumor, by grief that wakes to hunt at night. We answer those tests not with the old teeth, but with—" Taryn stood. He did not walk. He bolted. Warders startled, then arrested their own reflexes to avoid making a spectacle into a tragedy. The boy ran like a comet, ignoring the orbits of smaller stones, and leapt, small body, bright fur, human-shaped hands reaching, into Aaron's arms. The room's sound inverted. The silence rang. Taryn's voice was small and huge. It hit the curved stone like a bell malleted by a god. "Starfather." Aaron's heart tried to climb out of his throat. He held the child the way you hold a thing you would rather die than drop. He did not look at the cameras. He did not look at the diplomats who measured everything. He looked at the boy who had named a truth and dared the world to break him for it. Every head turned to Soraya. Volper culture treated kinship words like oaths hammered into silver and worn inside the cheek. A child did not fling one across a public space. A ruler did not accept one without setting into motion gears older than stars. Soraya looked at them for a long time that measured itself in heartbeats and the slow fall of dust in sunlight. Her ears moved a millimeter. Her tail drew a circle. Then she smiled, and both the alien and the human in that smile were kind. "Indeed," she said, voice a warm steel that the room leaned toward because it had no choice and did not want one. "Ambassador Vale has demonstrated the courage to choose family and the patience to repeat that decision. In our songs, that is what makes a star father. Bloodlines bind. So do bonds." The ripple that ran the amphitheater's circumference was not quite applause, not quite fear, not quite awe. It was a new thing being born. Aaron found his voice by borrowing something of hers. "Your Majesty?" "Soraya?" A public intimacy now sanctioned by a different one. "I am honored beyond what language can carry." Taryn's breath hiccuped against his collar. "Does it mean you won't let space take you away?" "That," Soraya said into the microphone, "depends on whether I give him a job he cannot do from elsewhere." Laughter cracked the tension, a controlled demolition that left the foundation stronger. Soraya looked directly at Aaron, then, and there was no queen in it, only a mother making a choice and a woman deciding whether to trust a stranger with the most breakable thing she owned. Cultural liaison to the Concord. Bridgemaker. Story keeper. Starfather by bond. "Do you accept, Aaron Vale?" "Yes," Aaron said, and the word was lighter than air and heavier than vows, and it fit his mouth as if it had been waiting there all his life. 6 months later, it was ordinary to watch a Volpar cub and a human child argue in 2 languages about whether hopscotch should have comet tails drawn in chalk. It was ordinary to hear lullabies stitched together out of human folk songs and Volpar call and answer. Ordinary to read a bulletin announcing joint patrols of debris lanes and a call for tutors fluent in both cultures' gentle words. Aaron's office in the Humanian Cultural Center, a building that wore plants like jewelry, looked out over a plaza where exchange students traded lunches and recipes and insults so affectionate they squeaked. Applications for the graph schools overflowed his slate. The days ran hard. The nights ran soft. He fell asleep sometimes with policy in his hair and woke with chalk dust on his knuckles and the faint scent of spice and fur on his shirt. Star Father. Taryn barreled in without ceremony, as royals do when they feel safe. The council said yes to 10 more schools, and Mother did not even growl. Much. Saraya, a beat behind, flowed into the doorway, wearing a court robe that admitted in its stitching that it would rather be a blanket. I growled in a register you cannot yet hear, little comet, she said, tail tick flicking. Then to Aaron, we need teachers who can translate not just grammar, but manners. People who can teach when to be loud and when to be bright, Aaron said. And when to be soft, Taryn added, solemn with the weight of a word he had learned inside his bones. Saraya came to stand beside them, her shoulder brushing Aaron's. In public, they were careful. In private, the care was a different shape. You have made a bridge that can bear weight, she said. We made it, Aaron corrected. You, me, a child who keeps kicking ladders. Taryn considered whether it was the right time to kick a ladder. Decided it was. Did. Bridges are invitations, and invitations are also doors. Trouble learns to knock. A month into the new term, a splinter of war floated up from some abandoned trench of space. A pirate cohort who had made a religion of resentment hit an exchange convoy and tried to make a spectacle of breaking children's toys. They wanted a scar for the evening newscasts. They got Aaron, who had been a negotiator too long to forget he could be a firefighter. By the time Saraya's dreadnought spun into position, the convoy's escort, Volpar frigates painted in songs, had already pinned the raiders into a gravity eddy. Aron rode a shuttle with a throat that felt like it had swallowed a battery. He climbed aboard a ruined freighter that groaned with heat and swore affectionately at bolts that held when they should have surrendered. He carried 3 toddlers, 1 teen, and a cage of 6-lung songbirds through a corridor of smoke while cursing in Spanish because it made his lungs work in rhythm. Later, covered in soot and bird feathers, he took a call. The screen filled with a face whose ears tilted the way relief tilts when it's too proud to cry. Spooning, Saraya said dryly. Cannot put out fires. No, Aaron admitted, chest hitching. But it can teach you to lift the lid slowly. I am told, she said, and her voice went dark warm and private, that my son watched the broadcast and announced to his entire classroom, that is my star father. He rescues the littles, and then he tells them a story so they stop shaking. Aaron stared at the screen until his eyes hurt. He is not wrong. No, Saraya said. He is not. The Volper codices were not used to being edited by feelings. They preferred precedent you could gnaw and swallow. Saraya summoned the 12 Claw Council and laid on their lacquered table a simple sentence drafted in 2 hands. Bond kin, recognized by royal oath, shall enjoy protections of blood kin. A debate howled. Tail tips snapped. A legal scholar tried to cite a precedent that did not exist and found herself writing it by mistake. A young member, fur, not yet heavy with winter, said quietly, our songs remembered this before our law did. Saraya let the room exhaust itself. Then she spoke, softly enough that people had to lean forward. The law exists to guard what we cannot trust power to guard alone. If our law does not protect the family that a frightened child named in front of the stars, then our law is worse than our songs. It passed by the narrow margin history reserves for things it intends to regret not doing sooner. Aaron did not attend the vote. He read the text in a quiet room and pressed his palm to a window until it fogged. Taryn dragged him away to jump a hopscotch grid with Comet Tails. You are now boringly legal, Taryn announced. I will still call you Starfather. Good, Aaron said, and knocked the chalk dust from his hands on his pant leg, and felt something in him lock into place that had been jangling loose since he was a boy reading alone in a stairwell because the kitchen was too loud. In the royal suite, bedtime always tried to mutate into subcommittee. Aaron fought it with stories. Tonight, Taryn decreed, cuddled into a mound of blankets, ears peeking like ship's sails over the horizon. Tell the one about the girl who taught a hill to sing. Saraya sprawled in a chair that pretended to be stern and failed. She unlaced the high boots that queens wore for hours because queens never knew when they might have to run. She watched with a face that made a liar of people who said power makes you less human. Aron told of a village that quarreled with a hill because the hill rolled their carts back down. The girl did not scold the hill. She listened. She found the rhythm of the hill's breathing, yes, breathing, and she hummed until the hill hummed back. The carts learned the song. They climbed easily after that. The village forgot to say thank you, except in the way they stopped swearing at the wind. When it ended, Taryn said, eyes already dragging closed, "You always make bravery sound like listening." "It is the kind that lasts," Aron said. Saraya's voice, from the dim, was velvet on stone. "I've begun to suspect, Aron, that all the battles I won by being sharp left a rind over the softer victories." "I don't think you're any less dangerous," Aron murmured. "Good," she said, smiling where he couldn't see it. "Dangerous is still useful. I am simply dangerous for the right things." Taryn's breathing deepened into sleep. In that quiet, the auroras turned. Aegis Nexus sighed in its cables. Somewhere far away, a school bell invented by two cultures rang in a tone that made neither flinch. There are loud wars, kinetic, televised, scored in brass. And there are quiet wars against habits that chew people when no one is looking. The cultural center fought the second kind. They trained middlers, mediators, whose badge was a pin shaped like a spoon and a flint, to de-escalate cafeteria fights about who got the last kelp crisp. They ran workshops titled How to Be Wrong in Public and When to Let Your Tail Speak for You. They hosted argument tournaments where the prize went to the team whose opponent hugged them afterward. When the first cohort graduated, Saraya insisted on a feast of grafting. Humans brought stews that had been stirred by 5 different hands. Volpar brought charred sweet root cakes sprinkled in powdered amber. Speeches were brief by decree. Music was long by conspiracy. Taryn led a procession of children who wore caps decorated with chalked comet tails. Aron delivered the only remark he had prepared. "A bridge is proven," he said, "not by how pretty its arches are, but by the number of feet that cross it while arguing about snacks." The applause made the crystal bones of the hall sing back. Peace is not a spell. It is a practice. But some days it looks briefly like magic. On the anniversary of the Conquered, Aegis Nexus did something it had never done. It rotated to keep Viral's halo perfectly still in the main window for 24 hours, so that no one had to chase the beauty. People gathered. They made nests out of coats or sprawled like cats, tails and legs in tangles that would have scandalized their grandparents and made their grandchildren yawn with familiarity. Saraya stood with Aron and Taryn at the rail. Her hand, warm, fur soft at the wrist, claws sheathed to tenderness, found Aron's. Taryn leaned against both of them and made a satisfied noise like a kettle that has decided not to boil. "Mother," he said. "Eyes on the quiet miracle of a stationary aurora was the word I chose that day. Too heavy?" Saraya's tail did a slow, proud S. It was exactly the right weight. It bent things into their proper shape. Aron swallowed a knot that was not grief and was not joy and was made of both. "Words like that," he said, "do not break when you use them. They break everything that needs breaking." Taryn considered this and nodded the nod of a prince who will one day make maps kinder. "Good, because I am not planning to unlatch it." "Do not," Saraya said. "We have written a law around it." "We have written a life around it," Aron said. Outside, the halo stayed. Inside, the map of 3 lives refused to change its mind. Peace drew out the ghosts that profit from clatter. The Old Blood Compact, a cluster of Volpar houses whose crests were all teeth and memory, petitioned the 12 Claw Council to review Saraya's new bondkin statute. They did not name Aron. They named precedent, which is how people try to pierce skin without admitting they aim for the heart. House Verac, all ivory rings and slick tails, spoke first. If a queen can swear bondkin on a foreigner, what stops a lesser noble from swearing 10 fathers and a flock of hungry uncles to raid the inheritance dishes? House Bluethorn, whose matron had laughed at Taryn's joke in a corridor and regretted it ever since, added, "Songs are for fires, laws are for winters." Saraya did not bristle. Bristling is a tell. She let the council's ring fill with voices until echoes got bored. Then she rose, a woman with orange fur warmed by lamplight, ears forward in a listening posture that meant you are not ready for my teeth. "Our law has long recognized foster guardians," she said, soft enough that even Verac leaned forward. "And we honor oath siblings, forged in battle. You fear bondkin because it is domestic, not martial. Because it brings tenderness into codes written for spears. Your fear is honest, but it is not useful. Varak bared the tip of a fang. Your Majesty. My son stood in the assembly and named a truth, Soraya continued, calm as temple stone. I did the law's work and named it back. This is not the invasion of strangers. It is the recognition that families sometimes graft by choice. Denying that truth because it makes the old blood uncomfortable is like denying a sunrise because someone prefers dark. The council's clerk scratched furiously, trying to catch the turn of phrase. Varak's tail twitched in irritation. You speak as if law is poetry. I speak as if law were alive, Soraya said. Because it is. And because I intend for it to stay that way. Her eyes slid to Aaron in the observer's gallery, no crown in his hair, only chalk dust. And something like weather changed. The vote to review failed by 2 claws. The statute held, for now. At the Cultural Center, Aaron added a course, How to Make Good Mistakes. Children lined up as if for pastries. Adults came in slow, embarrassed pairs. Rule 1, he said, chalk tapping a rhythm, name the harm, not your hurt. I stepped on your tail is different from I feel bad, you yelped. Taryn sat in the front row with a notebook shaped like a fox paw. He raised his hand. What if you did not step on the tail, but your friend did, and you were thinking about stepping on it? Then apologize for your silence, Aaron said. Soraya, seated in the back with a hood up to avoid becoming the lesson's gravitational center, made a sound that might have been a laugh under its breath. They role-played a human girl who barged through a doorway without scenting the air first, a Volpar boy who interpreted quiet as contempt, a teacher who said be reasonable when someone meant be small. They practiced the Volpar sign for I will argue with you while holding your hand, 2 fingers turned, palm open, and the human phrase say more without sharpening it into a dare. After class, Taryn tugged Aaron's sleeve. You are very good at teaching people to be wrong. Aaron grinned. It's my second favorite art. What is your first? Being wrong faster than the room. The first diplomatic trip to the Volpar homeworld, Kareth, spiraled into calendars with the slow inevitability of winter. Kareth was a world of red grasses and black rivers, of wind that smelled faintly of smoke even when nothing burned. Its smaller moon, Sable, housed the Burrow of Oaths, a warren carved into basalt where the Dominion kept promises in closets and took them out to wear when company came. Soraya led the way down corridors polished by generations of tales. She walked without court sparkle, a queen at home, a daughter in halls where her own claws had first clicked. Aaron walked beside her, careful to mirror the gait of a guest. Neither too slow, which reads as disdain, nor too eager, which reads as prey. Taryn bounded ahead and darted back, unable to decide whether the bones of his mother's childhood were a museum or an amusement park. An elder stepped from a side passage, fur-silvered to ash. Child, she said to Soraya, and the word cracked open a private space in a public corridor. You bring a human to the burrows. I bring family, Soraya answered, ears dipping, not in deference but in respect so deep it did not count its own height. Star Mother Kale, she added to Aaron, keeper of the old songs and the old scowls. Kale's eyes were sharp enough to split quarried truth. She sniffed Aaron, the Volpar ritual abridged by status and age. He smells of chalk and smoke. He is either a teacher or a disaster. Both, Soraya said. Good, Kale said, and the air pressure in the corridor changed. We have missed both. She led them to a chamber where 100 handprints, Volpar and more, pressed into black stone like constellations caught mid-birth. Here, Kale said, we take gentle oaths. Not the war ones, the ones that require staying. Soraya's tail brushed Aaron's wrist. Will you put your hand in the stone with us? Every day, he said, because every other answer would have been too small. Spring on Kareth meant shedding. In courtyards strung with lanterns, Volpar brushed one another's coats to help old fur let go. The festival was half practical, half tender riot. Piles of orange and russet and white drifted like small, benevolent storms. Children made nest animals of them. Elders tied ribbons to clumps that caught the wind, whispering a worry and watching it skitter away. Taryn presented Aaron with a brush serious enough to be ceremonial. Star Father, he said, eyes bright with mischief. The law says bond kin must help with the itchy places. I did not read that clause, Aaron said. It is oral tradition, Soraya said, barely hiding her grin. She sat cross-legged on a mat, the sweep of her orange fur a living fire. Be warned. If you brush me, I will own you for the span of 3 songs. Too late, Arn said, and began with the careful strokes children learn first, listening with his hands. Saraya's ears lowered in a controlled surrender, her jaw unclenched by degrees that only someone watching closely would mark. You carry your shoulders like a besieged city, he murmured. I have been one, she said. Sometimes I forget the gates are open. He found the itchy place, where armor straps had once bitten long ago, and worked until the small, involuntary sound she made could have been a purr if purring were a thing queens admitted to doing. Terran's laughter spilled like bells. Kale passed by, smirking, and tied a red ribbon to a shed tuft. For stubbornness, she said. It may float somewhere it is needed. Aegis Nexus woke one midnight to the taste of burnt sugar. The Archive Woods, that breathing library of leaf and memory, glowed with ember light. An electrical fault had found a dry seam. The fire climbed it like a ladder, built of old speeches. Arn ran with a bucket brigade that had not existed the day before. Saraya arrived in trousers and bare feet, tail wrapped tight for safety, voice quiet with the kind of authority that makes panic look gauche. Pairs, she said. Names. No hero acts without spotters. We save people first. Then we save stories. Terran stood with Kale at the line where heat chattered and a child's courage must be held by someone else's hands. He shook and did not run. Kale sang under her breath, the old cadence that keeps fur from forgetting where skin ends. When the flames were cowed to sulk and steam, Arn found Saraya in the smoking grove, cradling a scorched leaf book as if it were a living thing, because it was. Ash streaked her cheek. Her orange fur was stippled with black like a constellation mapping loss. It's the oral histories from the first outpost, she said. We almost lost the remembering. We didn't, Aaron said. And now we add a chapter, how an archive learned to stop burning. Her laugh came out half cough. Do not make me love you with jokes while my lungs are busy. Then save it for later, he said, and kissed her smoky temple where the fur thinned to skin, a gesture so gentle it felt like writing a promise on fog. House Varak, wounded but not wise, formed a subcommittee with a name too long for breath, the Coalition for Safeguarding Lineal Purity in Succession Protocols, its acronym hissed. They scheduled hearings. They fed friendly feeds alarming questions. If a queen could name bond kin, could a bond son inherit ships? Would human lullabies contaminate battle tempos? Saraya allowed it. Sunshine rots the kind of mold that speaks only in corners. Aaron testified without performance. A bond kin law does not steal from blood, he said. It adds to the number of people who show up when it rains. The committee chair, fur-combed to a blade, tried to bait him. Would you give your human inheritance to a Volpar kit? I would give my life to one if a hallway went to smoke, Arn said, and the room's air changed temperature. Inheritances follow paperwork. Families follow vows. Kale sent a note to Saraya afterward. When he speaks like that, I hear the old songs learning new verses. A message arrived, wax seal pressed with the sable court sigil, a moon scratched by claws. Attend. Saraya dressed not in gold but in clarity, a simple tunic that let the orange of her fur blaze honest in lamplight, a belt with 3 tokens, one for blood, one for oath, one for grief, all worn openly. Aaron wore the same suit he had called lucky since the assembly day and never washed with anything that would erase the faint scent of ash and spice that had become his second skin. The Sable Court's chamber was old enough to remember when promises were enforced by winter. The presiding moon judge, a Volpar with the patience of rock, listened while Varrock enumerated theoretical catastrophes in which bond-kin laws ended civilizations, marriages, and soup recipes. Then the judge turned to Saraya. Queen, is your bond-kin oath about politics? It is about a child who named the world correctly, Saraya said. Politics was forced to catch up. And you, human, the judge said, pivoting with a slow grace that made rhetoric seem silly. Did you invite the naming? No, Aaron said. I earned it accidentally by doing what every adult should do for a frightened child. That, the judge said, is the only invitation that has ever mattered here. He raised the gavel carved from fossil root. The Sable Court recognizes bond kin as ancient under a new word. Petition denied. Saraya did not smile. She simply exhaled a breath that had been holding winter behind her teeth. The Cultural Center hosted the first trial by stories, a public forum where grievances were presented as narratives, cross-examined as plot holes, and resolved with edits. Verac sent a junior advocate who sneered at the format, and then got eaten alive by a 15-year-old who pointed out that calling a human knife mouth, while accusing them of dulling tradition, was mixed metaphor malpractice. Terran presented a complaint about nap schedules that did not account for Fox hour, those liminal pulses when Volpar kits went bright as comets. A human teacher defended with data. Arn moderated as if he were conducting a chamber quartet. They agreed on flex periods and on a new sign to hang on doors: bright time, enter kindly, or bring fruit. Reporters tried to turn it into farce. Viewers turned it into a trend. Schools across the Concord began hosting story trials. Laws did not change. People did. Saraya, watching from the back with her hood up like a thief of free evenings, whispered to Kale, "They're practicing government where the air is soft." Kale's ears tipped. "I told you. We miss teachers and disasters. Not everyone attends festivals because they like music. On a night of lanterns, 3 humans with knives rigged to look like jewelry and 2 Volpar with claws filed dishonestly tried to make a point with blood. They forgot the first rule of Aegis Nexus. Everyone there has a spotter." Kale saw the tail language go wrong. Terran saw a reflection that did not blink when laughter came. Aaron, scanning as always for the shape of trouble, moved before he had a plan. Saraya moved with a plan that had no words. In the chaos that tried to bloom, Saraya disarmed the nearest assassin with the kind of efficiency that reshapes the air. Aaron intercepted a blade with a chair. Terran threw a bowl of syrup into a face. Viscous justice. And then did exactly what he had been trained to do. He froze and sang the call note, a sound that told guards where to converge without naming a target. When it was done, syrup dripped from an ear. A knife lay bent on the floor like a lesson. No one was dead. The lantern still burned. Reporters swarmed. Saraya held up her hand. "We do not make these fools famous. We do not fetch them the stage they wanted." Aaron put an arm around Terran and felt the boy's tremble transform into anger, clean, hot, not yet sharpened into something unforgiving. "You kept singing," Aaron said. "I wanted to bite," Terran admitted. "Song first," Kale said from behind them, voice proud and stern all at once. Then, if necessary, teeth. Volper children receive 3 names, the first at birth, the second on the day they choose a craft to court, the third when they choose who they will be for. Terran announced, because subtlety is for winter, that he wished to swear his 3rd name early. Too young, the chief attendant sputtered. "Just in time," Kale murmured. The burrow of oaths filled with breath. Terran stood between Saraya and Aaron, both in simple clothes, both vibrating with a pride neither wanted to show, because showing would mean crying and crying would mean hiccups, and no one wanted hiccups on sacred stone. The moon judge spoke the old lines. "Name your choosing." Terran's violets were steady. "I choose to be for bridges. I choose to be for the hands that reach, not the hands that shove away." He looked up at Aaron. "I choose to be for those who repeat their decision when it is hard." "Name your 3rd, the judge said. "I am Terran Bridgewise," he said, voice clear as a bell ringing in air cold enough to catch sound and hold it. Saraya's tail flicked a proud arc. Aaron's chest made a new room and moved into it. They pressed palms and paw hands into the basalt. The stone warmed briefly, recording. Outside, lanterns bobbed on the red grass as if the world had nodded. To celebrate, the center held a feast of borrowed mouths. Every dish told a story from someone else's people, cooked by someone who loved it without owning it. Human children learned to slice root cakes on the bias. Volpar children learned the dangerous art of salt to taste. At each table, a card read, "Ask who taught you this." Aaron circulated, stealing bites and compliments. Saraya allowed herself to be still, letting praise come and sit like a cat. Terran sprinted until Kale hooked him by the collar and made him eat in complete sentences. A musician tuned a double neck lute. "Requests?" he called. "Play something my father would have hated," Saraya said, wicked light in her amber eyes. The musician launched into a human sea shanty, and halfway through the refrain the Volpar percussionist found the offbeat that made it theirs. People who had never danced together found the same down step. A child with a chalk comet, tail drawn on her cap, stood on a chair and conducted. Later, much later, When lanterns burned low and compromises felt possible, Soraya leaned into Aaron's shoulder. "I could make an empire out of this," she said softly. "You already are," he said. Peace has logistics. A courier strike, clean, justified, disastrous, stalled the flow of physical mail across 3 sectors. For most species, it was a nuisance. For the Volpar, for whom scented letters carry the nuanced text can't hold, it was famine in the field of whispers. Tempers pricked. Rumors bred. A misread memo nearly unstitched a customs deal. Aaron convened an emergency whisper council. "We need sent proxies," he said. "Legal and cultural. Temporary. Honored." Soraya tapped a claw on the table. "We have old rituals, messengers who carry a cloth at the throat to bear someone else's trace. We can revive them." Kale provided recipes for memory scent, a blend of spices and oils mixed under songs that sharpen intention without claiming to be the real thing. Human engineers hacked the postal drone architecture to carry sealed scent packets in temperature-controlled nests. They held a public training, how to read a proxy honestly, how to refuse it without insult, how to say this will wait before it curdles. Within a week, the whisper famine eased. Taryn wrote a note in careful script, dabbed with memory scent that smelled like chalk and cinnamon, to Starfather. From Bright Time. Message: "Come home earlier." Aaron put it in his pocket and did not pretend he could not smell it all day. House Varrock did not give up. Resentment is good at foraging. They courted a cousin branch of the royal line. Lord Cadon, handsome as an advertisement and twice as shallow, with promises of ceremonial tail polish, and the chance to be first at a new game, undoing bond kin by overusing it. Cadon began swearing everyone to everyone, a carnival of counterfeit intimacy. Bond kin to a merchant to get a discount, bond kin to a singer to jump the waiting list, bond kin to a bloodhawk so it would stop shrieking near his manor. The feeds loved him. The elders did not. Soraya didn't move at first. She let him make noise. Noise tires itself. Then she issued a proclamation in 1 page in 4 sentences. Bond kin sworn for advantage dissolves like sugar in tea. Bond kin sworn for shelter withstands storms. A bond cannot be sold without becoming something else. This court will test bonds by asking who would cook soup for whom at midnight. Cadon tried to laugh it off, then found himself in a sable chamber, being asked quietly if he would cook soup or just post a picture of it. The feed clip of his paws went everywhere. His tail's angle, caught between arrogance and shame, became a meme. The carnival closed for lack of tickets. Carrot's winter arrived with air so sharp you could slice fruit on it. Aegis Nexus aligned to give its people a long view of the planet's glowing frost veins. In the royal suite, fires banked, blankets multiplied, and even queens learned the art of the wool sock. Taryn developed an obsession with constellation biscuits, which tasted like sugar and regret if you burned them, and like forgiveness if you did not. Aaron learned not to open the oven early, even when curiosity itched his skin. Soraya learned to nap, 1 paw hand draped over her eyes to keep dreams from sneaking in too brightly. They told stories of winter. Aaron told one about a town that saved its last candle for an argument so they could disagree properly without stumbling in the dark. Soraya told one about a fox who loaned her tail to the wind and had to chase it for a year, which is how patience was invented. Taryn told one about a teacher who bristled like a hedgehog until a kit brushed his quills and found the soft underneath, which made Aaron snort and pretend he was not sniffling. At night, when the halo's light turned thin and tender, Soraya rested her forehead against Aaron's. "The weight is less when you are near," she said. "It's not less," he answered. "It's shareable." Her tale made a slow circle, the language of agree. On the Concorde's 2nd anniversary, they held the Festival of First Bridges. Every school, every ward, every ship's mess built a model bridge with whatever they had. Noodles, wire, hull scrap, braided fur shed in spring. The only rule: you had to walk something you loved across it. A cup of tea, a kitten, an apology. Soraya opened the ceremony with no crown, only a ribbon in her orange hair the color of dawn on iron. Aaron spoke briefly about arches and weight and the pleasure of good joints. Taryn, now bridgewise, carried a bowl of soup across a child's construction of spoons and book spines and placed it, steaming, on a table marked midnight. KL sang. The crowd sang back. On screens across 10 worlds, People watched bridges shiver and hold. Later, a message flashed from the 12 Claw Council. By unanimous claw, the Bonkin statute stands. Petitioners are advised to bring better soup. Verac sulked. Bluethorn sent candied roots. Kadon posted a picture of a store bought broth and was mocked, then forgiven when he showed up to wash dishes. Soraya squeezed Arn's hand. "Do you know," she said, eyes bright with a joy she no longer disguised, "that I sometimes forget there was ever a time before your scent lived in these rooms?" Arn's laugh was quiet, astonished. "I sometimes forget there was a time when my shirts didn't smell like spice and ash and you." Taryn, already plotting next year's bridge out of chalk and come at tails, looked up at them, ears forward, and announced to no one and everyone, "Good. Then we are exactly where we belong." The next crisis did not arrive with knives or speeches. It arrived with a river. Aegis Nexus depends on coolant loops that flow like quiet arteries. A meteor bloom, sand grains with ambitions, scarred a conduit arc. The flow hiccuped. Heat learned to dream of theater. Arn sat with engineers who did math like prayer. Soraya visited the maintenance decks where rank smelled like grease, tail tied up in a knot of practicality. Taryn carried sandwiches because revolutions and repairs run on bread. An apprentice suggested a reroute that would force the river backward for 6 hours. Every senior said impossible. Kale, visiting with a bag of tools older than some ships, said, "Try it on a model. Practice being wrong small." They did. It groaned. It held. When the flip came, Aegis Nexus shuddered like a horse switching gates, then settled. The coolant river flowed the other way. The town moved to meet it. When it was done, the apprentice cried in a corner, quietly, the way people do when a thing they love did not die. Soraya found them, pressed a paw hand to their back. "Add a line to your story," she said. "We will read it aloud until the fear stops twitching." Aaron wrote the incident report like a bedtime tale that engineers could bear to dream about. A petty theft in the academy kitchens. Spices gone missing. A tail seen ducking out. Threatened to puff into something grand because feeds love to salt small wounds. The culprit turned out to be a human boy whose mother was sick, and who had discovered that cardamom in hot milk helped her breathe for a while. The old law said punish. The new practice said feed. Aaron convened a circle in the kitchen, the room already fragrant with apologies. Soraya came in quietly and leaned against a flour sack, tail swishing willing patience. Taryn brought a jar labeled emergency cinnamon. They did a story trial. The boy spoke. The head cook spoke, voice soft as sifted sugar. The circle wrote a new rule on a grease board. If you need spice for medicine, ask in the morning and the kitchen will measure it. If you take without asking, you will wash every pan and listen to 3 elders tell how hunger sounds. Kale added, and you will learn to toast cumin without burning it, which is more difficult than it looks and triple as useful. The boy washed pans, listened, learned. The feeds tried to turn it into mawkishness. The commentariat learned what it felt like to be outrated by kindness. Soraya received a request from an old rival, Matriarch Ilran of House Northlight, to mediate a dispute over hunting grounds on Kareth's far side. Ilran's ears were notched in the map of older battles. Her respect for Soraya was the kind that counts the teeth first. They met in a tent that smelled of snow. Aaron sat to one side, an interpreter of temperature, sensing when silence needed fuel. Taryn stayed home, because sometimes peace requires boredom, and he was very bad at that. Ilran demanded the lion's share. Soraya asked who had the lion. Ilran blinked, then laughed once, equal parts admiration and annoyance. They negotiated for hours in 15-minute bursts, warming their paws at a brazier between sessions. Aaron told a story about 2 fishermen who learned to share a net by learning to sing the same hauling song. Ilran eventually conceded the West Bank. "You've gotten worse at winning," she said to Soraya. "Worse? You make it feel like I chose it." Soraya's ears tipped. "You did." Ilran snorted. "I hate that." She extended a paw hand. "Do it to me again when I forget." A trader ship limped into dock with a siren choir, machine alarms, screaming out of tune. The captain, a human with a braid like a rope and a temper like a kettle, swore that the alarms had been right last year. "Your ship learned a new song," Soraya said after listening, head cocked. "You are ignoring it because you like the old one." Aron organized a concert. They brought in children with perfect pitch and elders with patience. They recalibrated the sirens to sing in a key that the crew would not tune out. The captain cried a little, then swore differently, then hugged a Vulpar mechanic who pretended not to enjoy it. Terran asked why grown-ups always cried when machines stopped screaming. Because they have been pretending not to hear the screaming for a long time, Aaron said. Then we should hold more concerts, Terran decided. We are, Soraya said, scratching an ear thoughtfully. We call them governance. News feeds found a photograph, blurry tender, of Aaron asleep on a couch, Terran sprawled on his chest like a warm comet. Soraya in a chair nearby with her paw hand on both their ankles. The caption war began at once. Domestic tyranny, soft treason, proof of hope, tailgate nap. Soraya did not indulge outrage. She released a statement. The queen sleeps sometimes, the boy grows, the liaison snores, the dominion stands. Aaron added nothing. Terran announced he did not snore and was soundly contradicted by every adult in a 10-meter radius. Kale sent the photographer a basket of pastries and a note. When you take something tender, feed the place you took it from. House Varrock tried to make it a scandal anyway. The council's smallest member, barely 30, fur still bright with youth, stood, tail stiff with earned courage, and said, I would be more concerned if the queen never slept and the child never sprawled. The feeds moved on, briefly chastened by the ferocity of ordinary people defending an ordinary moment. By the time the photograph of a queen, a human, and a boy dozing in the same room circled the Concorde, most people had already stopped calling it scandal. Ordinary tenderness had become harder to mock and easier to defend. The statute stood. Bond kin recognized, story trials embedded in schools, kitchens with rules for midnight spice, and grief days that let survivors breathe without apology. The laws were important, but what mattered more was how rooms themselves had changed, how people paused before speaking, how laughter sounded in spaces where suspicion used to echo. Soraya no longer walked with isolation coiled around her like armor. Arn no longer thought of diplomacy as a game of exhaustion. He had learned he was a roomkeeper, someone who made space wide enough for others to cross. Terran, who once ran lost through a hall of strangers, had grown into a boy who carried chalk and questions as if they were tools of state. On the anniversary of the Concorde, no grand ceremony was needed. Instead, in the archive woods, now healed from fire, children and elders gathered under lanterns. A small girl asked the last question, how do we keep it from breaking again? Aaron read the simple oath he carried everywhere. We will speak plainly. We will make pauses spacious. We will leave with fewer teeth marks than we arrived with. Soraya added, amber eyes warm, we will be dangerous for the right things. Terran finished, tail flicking like punctuation. We will argue like we want to play again tomorrow. The circle breathed together. Beyond the windows, Viral's halo poured its slow aurora across the sky. Inside, the Concorde felt less like a treaty and more like a house with many doors and no locked rooms. Terran leaned against Aaron's shoulder and reached for Soraya's paw hand. Again tomorrow? He murmured. Again tomorrow, Soraya said. Again, Aaron answered, meaning yes, and still, and we'll keep the bridge standing.